The galaxy had taught Ahsoka Tano that the universe was vast beyond comprehension, filled with countless worlds where beings of every description sought meaning in the endless dark. She had walked away from the Jedi Order, that ancient institution of rigid codes and failing wisdom, and carved her own path through the stars. A path built on personal conviction, rather than dogmatic adherence. But nothing in her years of wandering, fighting, and surviving had prepared her for the sensation of reality, itself tearing open like a wound, swallowing her whole, and spitting her out into a sky she didn't recognize above a city that gleamed with impossible brilliance. The fall should have killed her. The Force screamed warnings through her montrals as air. Resistance tore at her white cloak. But when she reached for that familiar energy to slow her descent, something felt wrong. The Force was there. She could sense its currents, feel its presence, but it moved differently here, sluggish and strange, as though she were trying to breathe underwater. Her telekinetic cushion manifested at perhaps 70% strength, enough to prevent her from cratering into the street, but not enough to avoid a bone-jarring impact that sent pedestrians scattering and car alarms shrieking. Across downtown Metropolis, Ahsoka rolled to her feet in a defensive crouch, white lightsabers igniting with their distinctive snap hiss, twin blades humming as she spun in a tight circle. Humans, the species was human here, were close enough, fled in panic. Some filming her with handheld devices, others simply running. Buildings of glass and steel stretched toward a yellow sun that felt warmer and somehow more alive than the suns she'd known. The architecture spoke of wealth and optimism, a city built by people who believed tomorrow would be better than today. Not the tired cynicism of the late Republic, not the oppressive uniformity of the Empire. Something different. Please remain calm. A woman's voice cut through the chaos, projected with trained authority. Emergency services are en route. Stay back from the impact zone. Ahsoka's headtails twitched, spatial awareness mapping the crowd's positions even as her eyes tracked for threats. No battle droids, no stormtroopers, no inquisitors with crimson blades and hollow eyes. Just frightened civilians and, her breath caught, a caped figure descending from the sky as though gravity were merely a polite suggestion he'd chosen to ignore. He wore blue and red, a stylized symbol emblazoned on his chest that her mind couldn't quite place. His build suggested immense physical power, but his face carried an expression of concern, rather than aggression as he landed 30 feet away, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. The yellow sun reflected off his cape, and something in Ahsoka's Force sense recoiled. This, being radiated power on a scale sheet, only felt near the most formidable Force users, yet there was no darkness in him, no hint of the corruption that accompanied such strength in her galaxy. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said, keeping her lightsabers active but pointed toward the ground, a show of readiness, not aggression. I don't know where I am or how I got here. You're in Metropolis, the man said, his voice carrying that same gentle authority. He drifted closer, and Ahsoka's enhanced senses noted he wasn't using any kind of propulsion system. He simply flew, as naturally as she breathed. My name is Superman. I'm here to help. His eyes, impossibly blue, studied her weapons, with curiosity rather than fear. Those are impressive. I've never seen energy blades quite like them. Lightsabers, Ahsoka said automatically, then cursed herself for volunteering information. Old habits from better times, when the Jedi had been peacekeepers rather than soldiers, when strangers could be greeted with openness rather than suspicion. I'm Ahsoka Tano, and I think something went very wrong with, she paused, uncertain how to explain hyperspace, the Force, or the catastrophic energy collision that had torn her from her reality. With my journey, a second figure materialized from the crowd with such fluid grace that even Ahsoka's combat-honed reflexes barely tracked the movement. This was a woman, tall and powerful, dressed in armor that spoke of ancient battlefields and divine craftsmanship. A golden lasso hung at her hip, and the sword strapped to her back carried the weight of a weapon that had tasted blood and emerged from the forge with purpose. The woman's eyes held the same warrior's assessment Ahsoka had seen in countless soldiers, measuring threat level, calculating combat potential, determining intent. She carries herself like a trained fighter, the warrior woman said to Superman, though her gaze never left Ahsoka. The weapons are unfamiliar, but her stance is perfect. She's seen real combat. So have you, Ahsoka observed, recognizing a kindred spirit even through the dimensional displacement and disorientation. You're military. Amazon, the woman corrected, and something in that single word carried the weight of legend. I am Diana, Princess of Themyscira. Some call me Wonder Woman. She took a single step closer, and Ahsoka noted the coiled readiness in her frame, not hostility, but the eternal vigilance of a warrior who had learned that peace was maintained through strength. Superman speaks truth. We wish to help, but we also need to understand what you are and why you've arrived. In our world radiating in energy, signature that several of our mystical contacts have already flagged as unprecedented. Our world. The words confirmed what Ahsoka's senses had been screaming since she'd recovered consciousness during the fall. This wasn't just another planet in the galaxy far, far away. The Force itself felt different here, moved through different channels, responded to different laws. She'd crossed something far more fundamental than space. She'd crossed the boundaries between realities themselves. I'm not a threat, Ahsoka said, though she kept her lightsabers ignited. Trust had to be earned, and she'd learned that lesson in the hardest possible way when the Jedi Order had abandoned her to political expediency. Not to your people, but I am dangerous. If forced to defend myself, she let the Force flow through her, despite its strange resistance, lifting a nearby steel beam that had been part of street construction with telekinetic effort. It rose slowly, more sluggishly than it should have, but the demonstration was clear. Where I come from, this power is called the Force. It seems to work differently here. Superman's expression shifted to something like recognition. Telekinesis. We have individuals with similar abilities. You're a metahuman. I don't know what that means, Ahsoka admitted, lowering the beam carefully. But if you're asking whether I have abilities beyond what you'd consider normal, then yes. I was trained she hesitated, as a warrior monk before I chose a different path. A Jedi. A third voice cut through the conversation, and Ahsoka's head whipped toward the source even though she saw no one. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, filtered through technology that her danger sense identified as sophisticated communication equipment, male, low and controlled, with an edge that spoke of suspicion earned through bitter experience. We've monitored broadcasts from theoretical parallel dimensions. The Force, lightsabers, Jedi Order, they match certain fictional narratives from our entertainment media. But fiction doesn't crash into Metropolis, radiating mystical energy. That's setting off alarms from here too. The Tower of Fate. Batman, Superman said, and something in his tone carried fondness mixed with exasperation. She's clearly disoriented. Give her a moment. She's clearly dangerous. The unseen voice, Batman, corrected. Unknown weapons. Energy manipulation, combat training. Dimensional displacement. Until we understand what she is and why she's here. She represents a potential threat to Earth. Diana's hand moved to her sword hilt, not in threat toward Ahsoka, but in warning to the disembodied voice. She represents a warrior far from home, Batman. Show some diplomatic sense. Ahsoka felt something twist in her chest at the exchange, the easy familiarity of people who'd worked together long enough to argue like family. The clear lines of authority and mutual respect. It reminded her painfully of the relationship she'd once shared with Anakin, Master Obi-Wan, and the rest of the 501st, before everything had fallen apart, before the Order had failed her. I was a Jedi, she said quietly, deactivating her lightsabers and maglocking them to her belt. The gesture of disarmament drew immediate reactions. Superman's posture relaxed slightly. Diana's hand eased away from her weapon, and even the invisible Batman seemed to pause in his assessment. I walked away from that life when the organization I served proved itself more interested in politics than justice. I won't ask you to trust me. I know better than anyone that trust has to be earned. But I'm telling you the truth. I didn't choose to come here. I don't know how to get home. And until I figure that out, I just want to avoid causing any more damage than my arrival already has. Superman descended the rest of the way to street level, his cape settling around him like a mantle of authority tempered by compassion. Then let us help you figure it out. We have resources, scientists, mystics, technology that might help us. understand what happened, and possibly reverse it. He extended a hand, the gesture both literal and symbolic. In the meantime, you'll need somewhere safe to stay, somewhere we can monitor the energy you're radiating and make sure it doesn't attract the wrong kind of attention. The wrong kind of attention, Ahsoka repeated, her montrals picking up the subtle shifts in Superman's tone that suggested deep concern. You mean you have enemies who would be interested in someone like me? This world has faced gods and monsters, Diana said, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience. Beings of immense power who seek conquest or destruction. Your energy signature is unique, unprecedented. There are those who would see you as a weapon to be claimed or a threat to be eliminated. Ahsoka looked at the crowd of civilians still watching from a safe distance, at the gleaming city that surrounded her, at these two powerful beings who could have attacked but instead offered assistance. She thought of the Jedi Council, how their fear and rigidity had ultimately betrayed everything they claimed to represent. She thought of Anakin, who'd once told her that the best way to judge an organization was by how it treated those who were vulnerable and displaced. These strangers were offering her exactly what the Jedi Order had failed to provide when she'd needed it most. The benefit of the doubt. I'll accept your help, she said finally. But I'm not joining any organization, and I'm not taking orders blindly. If I stay as an ally, not a subordinate. I've had enough of rigid hierarchies and political compromise for one lifetime. Superman's smile was warm, carrying genuine understanding rather than condescension. I think you'll fit in just fine. Welcome to Earth, Ahsoka Tano. There's someone I'd like you to meet, our team's mystic consultant. If anyone can help you understand why the Force feels different here, it'll be her. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character in the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. As Superman rose into the air and gestured for her to follow, Ahsoka felt the Force ripple with a sensation she'd almost forgotten, the gentle whisper of possibility, the sense that perhaps, in this strange new reality, she might find what she'd been searching for since leaving the Jedi Order behind. A place where individual conviction mattered more than institutional authority, where warriors fought for what was right rather than what was politically expedient. She didn't yet know that this world had its own Jedi Council, its own rigid hierarchy, its own capacity for heroism and failure woven together in complex tapestry. She didn't know that the Justice League she was about to encounter had saved this world countless times, and that some of its members harbored dark contingencies born from the terrible knowledge that even heroes could fall. She didn't know that in another timeline, the man now offering her sanctuary had become a tyrant whose quest for peace had drowned the world in authoritarian control. But she would learn. In the shadows of Gotham and the light of Metropolis, in the mystic spaces between dimensions and the cold calculations of Earth's greatest detective, Ahsoka Tano would discover that heroism in this universe was far more complicated than the Jedi's ancient codes had ever acknowledged. And somewhere beyond the stars, beyond the boundaries of reality itself, an entity of cosmic malevolence felt the dimensional rifts echo and smiled, recognizing in that strange new energy, signature and opportunity to expand his eternal conquest into territories previously beyond even his reach. The Lord of Apocalypse was nothing if not patient. The watchtower hung in geosynchronous orbit above Earth like a silent guardian, its crystalline architecture refracting starlight across surfaces that merged Kryptonian technology with human engineering in ways that would have fascinated the Republic's best scientists. Ahsoka stood in the observation deck, one hand pressed against the transparent aluminum viewport, watching her new reality spin beneath her with oceans of blue and continents of green that somehow felt both alien and achingly familiar. Beautiful, isn't it? Superman had joined her without announcement, though her montrals had tracked his approach, even without the Force operating at full capacity. Her Togruta biology gave her spatial awareness that transcended normal human perception. No matter how many times I see it from up here, it never gets old. That's home. 7 billion people, all trying to figure out how to live together. It reminds me of Coruscant, Ahsoka said quietly. the capital world of the Republic I served. Except Coruscant was one massive city covering the entire planet. You could walk for days and never see natural ground. She paused, memory pulling her back to nights on the Jedi Temple's meditation balconies, watching endless streams of traffic flow between kilometer-high buildings. I wonder if it's still standing. The Empire had no love for symbols of the old order. Superman's reflection in the viewport showed concern. Your galaxy went through a war. Several. Ahsoka turned to face him directly. The Clone Wars lasted 3 years and killed billions. When it ended, the Republic became an empire. The Jedi were hunted to near extinction, and everything I'd fought to protect was twisted into something dark. Her hand moved, unconsciously, to her lightsabers. I survived because I wasn't part of the Order anymore when the Purge came, because I'd already walked away. That must have been difficult, Superman said, and his tone carried genuine empathy rather than empty platitude. Leaving behind everything you knew. It was the right choice. Ahsoka met his impossibly blue eyes and saw something there that surprised her, understanding. That went beyond mere sympathy. This being who could fly and radiated power like a sun knew what it meant to stand apart. The Jedi had become so focused on maintaining their position in the Republic's political structure that they'd forgotten what they were supposed to represent. They claimed to serve the Force, but they really served the Senate. When I was falsely accused of a crime and the Council chose political expediency over defending me, I realized the organization had lost its way. Sounds familiar? A woman's voice interjected, and Ahsoka turned to find Diana approaching alongside, a striking figure in black armor with a metallic skull, motif that would have seemed menacing if not for the warmth in his dark eyes. The Dark Knight himself, Batman, finally revealed rather than disembodied. The League has faced similar questions. When does protecting people become controlling them? When does justice become tyranny? Batman's cowl hid most of his expression, but his body language spoke volumes. Coiled readiness, analytical observation, the bearing of someone who had studied her every movement since Metropolis, and formed detailed conclusions. Zatanna examined the energy residue from your arrival, he said without preamble. The Force, as you call it, registers as dimensional, magic rather than the metahuman mutation we initially suspected. It's similar to what our mystics manipulate, but the source is fundamentally different. You're not just from another planet. You're from another reality entirely. That explains why it feels wrong here, Ahsoka said, relief mixing with concern. I can still access the Force, but it's like trying to speak through a translator that doesn't quite understand the language. Zatanna believes you can adapt. Batman pulled a holographic display from his utility belt, projecting complex mystical diagrams that reminded Ahsoka painfully of the Jedi Archive's holocron interfaces. Your connection to the Force is instinctive, woven into your neural pathways through years of training. If you work with her and Dr. Fate, you should be able to retrain that connection to interface with this dimension's mystical energy framework. Full capacity restored within weeks, possibly days. And in the meantime, Ahsoka watched the diagrams rotate, noting similarities between the forces described, flow, and the intricate patterns Batman had mapped. I'm operating at maybe 85%. Against normal threats, that's fine. Against gods and monsters? She gestured to the 3 beings surrounding her. You all radiate power that would have made you legends in my galaxy. If I'm going to be useful here, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Diana stepped forward, and Ahsoka recognized the gesture, warrior to warrior, offering not comfort but respect. You held your ground in Metropolis despite dimensional displacement and power disruption. You identified threats, assessed options, and chose de-escalation over combat. That judgment matters more than raw power. She paused, and something almost like approval flickered across her features. Superman told me you refused to join us as a subordinate, that you demanded to remain an independent ally rather than accept orders blindly. I meant it, Ahsoka said. I've served in hierarchies before. I've watched good people compromise their principles because the chain of command demanded it. I won't do that again. Good. Batman's voice carried a note that might have been approval, though it was hard to tell through the cowl's distortion. The League isn't a military organization with absolute authority. We coordinate, we share intelligence. We work together when threats exceed individual capacity. But each member maintains autonomy over their methods and choices. He fixed her with a stare that, even without visible eyes, carried weight. That said, if you're going to operate on Earth, you need to understand the rules of engagement. We don't kill. Ahsoka felt her jaw tighten. Even when the alternative is letting innocent people die. Even then, Superman said, his tone gentler than Batman's, but equally firm. There's always another way. We find it. That's not always true. The words came out harder than Ahsoka intended, edged with memories of impossible choices on battlefields where the alternatives to lethal force had been exhausted. I've faced enemies who couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be contained, who would kill thousands if given the chance. Sometimes the choice is between two evils, and you pick the one that saves more lives. I know that argument, Batman said, and something in his voice suggested bitter familiarity. I've heard it from people I respect. Soldiers, warriors, even some heroes. He moved closer, and Ahsoka noted the controlled aggression in his stance. This wasn't a man who relied on superhuman abilities, but someone who'd honed mortal flesh to its absolute peak. But the moment we decide who lives and who dies, we stop being heroes and become executioners. We lose the moral authority that separates us from the monsters we fight. Even if the monster is the Joker? Another voice cut in, and Ahsoka turned to see a younger man in red and black armor enter the observation deck. His helmet bore a distinctive red symbol, and the guns holstered at his thighs immediately marked him as the dissenting voice in this particular debate. Even when you know he'll escape Arkham, kill dozens more innocents. And the only thing preventing that is your stubborn refusal to do what needs doing. Jason, Batman's tone carried warning and something deeper, old pain. Old arguments that had clearly scarred both parties. This isn't the time. It's always the time, Jason Red Hood. Ahsoka's spatial sense identified the designation from earlier. Intelligence briefings, shot back. He looked at Ahsoka with eyes that had seen too much darkness for someone so young. You need to know what you're getting into. Batman's no-kill rule sounds noble until you're standing over the body of a kid who died because the Joker got his 50th second chance, until you realize that every death after the first is on the heroes who had the power to stop it permanently and chose not to. Diana moved between them with the practiced ease of someone who'd mediated this exact argument too many times. Ahsoka isn't here to relitigate our philosophical differences. She's here because we need to understand her capabilities, and she needs to understand Earth's threat landscape. She turned to Ahsoka with an expression that suggested both sympathy and assessment. Jason makes a point, crude as his delivery is. This world's darkness runs deep. There are enemies here who will test every principle you hold, who will present you with choices that have no good options. I know, Ahsoka said quietly. I've already made those choices. I've killed when there was no alternative, when lives hung in the balance, and hesitation meant death for innocence. She met Batman's masked gaze directly. But I've also seen what happens when warriors embrace killing too easily. I watched my master, the man who trained me, who I loved like a brother, fall to darkness because he convinced himself that the ends justified the means. The Sith, the dark side of the Force. They promise power through passion and freedom through strength. What they deliver is corruption and tyranny. Superman nodded slowly. That's why we maintain the line, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The moment we decide we're above morality, we become what we fight against. Like Injustice Superman, Ahsoka said, and the entire observation deck went silent. She'd heard the name whispered during her transit to the watchtower, caught fragments of a conversation between technicians about timelines and regime and what if. I don't understand all the details, but I gather there's a version of you who decided perfect order, justified absolute control. The silence stretched longer, heavy with implications. Finally, Superman spoke, his voice carrying a weight that suggested nightmares and close calls with the precipice Ahsoka had described. There are infinite realities, infinite versions of all of us. In some of those realities, I made different choices. Choices I pray I never make here. He turned to face Earth through the viewport, his cape settling around him like a shroud. We've seen what happens when power corrupts absolutely. When heroes decide they know better than the people they protect. When good intentions pave roads to hell. And that's why we watch each other, Batman said. His tone suggesting layers of meaning Ahsoka was only beginning to understand. Why we maintain accountability. Why no one, not even Superman, operates without oversight. He pulled another holographic display, this one showing a complex network of facilities, protocols, and what looked like contingency plans. The Tower of Babel protocols, emergency measures in case any League member is compromised, corrupted, or turned against humanity. Every member has countermeasures designed specifically for them. Including you? Ahsoka asked. Including me. Batman's confirmation carried no hesitation. If I go rogue, the League has protocols to stop me. We're the most dangerous individuals on the planet. That power requires safeguards. Ahsoka thought of the Jedi High Council, their arrogance and assumption of infallibility, their belief that their wisdom alone should guide the Republic's fate. She thought of how that pride had blinded them to Palpatine's machinations until it was too late, how their certainty had made them vulnerable to the very darkness they claimed to oppose. You learn from your mistakes, she said. The Jedi never did. They repeated the same errors for 1,000 generations. Convinced their ancient traditions made them infallible, she moved to stand beside Superman at the viewport, watching Earth turn beneath them. Maybe that's the real difference between your Justice League and my Jedi Order. You understand you're fallible. We've made enough mistakes to learn that lesson, Diana said, joining them at the viewport. But understanding our fallibility doesn't mean accepting failure. It means working harder to find the right path. Together, she placed a hand on Ahsoka's shoulder, the gesture carrying warriors' respect. You've seen organizations fail. You've watched institutions betray their principles. But you haven't stopped fighting for what's right. That's the spirit we need. Red Hood snorted from across the deck. Pretty speech, princess. But wait until she faces Gotham's reality. Wait until she sees what actually lurks in this world's shadows. He started toward the exit, pausing at the threshold. For what it's worth, Tano, I hope you're stronger than you look. You're going to need it. After Jason left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the observation deck. Batman was the first to break it, his voice carrying the weight of experience earned through decades in darkness. He's not wrong about Gotham. If you want to understand Earth's true nature, not the hope Superman represents or the nobility Diana embodies, you need to see where the light doesn't reach, where regular people face horrors that would break lesser spirits, and where heroes have to make the impossible choices you described. You're inviting me to Gotham, Ahsoka said, recognizing the offer for what it was, a test and an opportunity. I'm offering you the truth, Batman corrected. Superman will show you humanity's potential. Diana will demonstrate its nobility. But I'll show you its darkness and what it takes to hold the line when everyone else has given up. He turned toward the exit, cape swirling with practiced drama. The choice is yours. But if you're serious about understanding this world and finding your place in it, you need to see all of it, not just the pretty parts. Ahsoka looked at Superman and Diana, reading permission in their expressions despite the concern that flickered across both faces. These were beings of immense power offering her autonomy, trusting her judgment, respecting her right to choose. Everything the Jedi Council had failed to do. When do we leave? She asked. Batman's smile was invisible beneath the cowl, but she heard it in his voice. Tonight. Gotham's darkness doesn't keep business hours. As the Dark Knight disappeared into the corridor beyond, Superman placed a hand on Ahsoka's shoulder. He's testing you. Batman always does. But he's also giving you exactly what you asked for, the unvarnished truth about Earth and its heroes. The Man of Steel's expression carried both hope and concern. Whatever you see in Gotham, remember, darkness exists here, but so does light. Don't let one eclipse the other. Ahsoka thought of the Clone Wars, of the darkness that had consumed her master, of the Empire's rise and the Jedi's fall. She thought of how she'd survived by finding balance between the rigid dogma of the Order and the seductive promises of the dark side. I've walked between light and darkness before, she said. I know how to maintain balance. Diana's expression suggested she understood something Ahsoka hadn't yet articulated. Balance is harder here. The lines blur in ways you may not expect. But if anyone can navigate that complexity, it's a warrior who's already chosen her own path once. As Earth turned beneath them and the Watchtower's systems hummed with quiet efficiency, Ahsoka felt the Force ripple through. This strange reality with an emotion she recognized from her earliest days as Anakin's Padawan. Anticipation mixed with apprehension, the sense that a great test awaited and its outcome remained uncertain. Gotham's darkness called, and with it, the first real examination of whether Ahsoka Tano's principles could survive in a universe where gods walked among mortals and even heroes could become monsters. Gotham City wore its corruption like a second skin. Darkness pressed into every alley and shadow until the boundary between night and the city's soul became indistinguishable. Ahsoka stood on a gargoyle-encrusted rooftop in the Bowery, rain drumming against her montrals while her Force sense, still sluggish but adapting, mapped the human misery that saturated the air like a physical presence. Below, the streets crawled with predators in human form. Dealers peddling chemical oblivion, pimps selling flesh, enforcers collecting protection money from businesses that would never see actual protection. "Welcome to my city," Batman said from the shadows behind her, his voice distorted by the cowl into something that scraped across nerve endings like broken glass. Population 4 million. Crime rate 300% above national average. Corruption so deep it's become structural. Most people who live here never escape. He moved beside her with silence that defied his armored bulk. "This is where hope comes to die." "You're wrong." Ahsoka kept her eyes on the street below, where a woman clutched her child's hand and hurried past a group of gang members who laughed and made obscene gestures. The woman's fear was palpable even from this height, but so was her determination. She was getting her child home safely, no matter what. Hope doesn't die. It just learns to survive in smaller spaces. Batman made a sound that might have been approval. "You see it too. Good." He pointed toward a warehouse 3 blocks east, where Ahsoka's montrals detected concentrated human activity despite the late hour. Black Mask's operation. Human trafficking, primarily young women from Eastern Europe promised legitimate work and delivered into slavery. 43 victims currently held in that building, waiting for transport to auction houses across the eastern seaboard. Ahsoka's hands moved to her lightsabers. "Then we shut it down." "We do," Batman agreed. "But understand the reality first. I've shut down Black Mask's trafficking operations 17 times in the past 8 years. He always rebuilds, always finds new victims. The system that enables him, corrupt officials, desperate poverty, social infrastructure designed to fail, persists regardless of how many times I put him in Arkham." His cape stirred in the wind that howled between buildings. "I saved those 43 women tonight. Tomorrow, 43 more will disappear into the same pipeline. So you do nothing?" Ahsoka heard her voice sharpen with anger. "You accept that suffering is inevitable. I save every person I can, every single night, knowing it will never be enough." Batman's tone carried the weight of 2 decades fighting a war. He knew he couldn't win. That's the difference between hope and delusion. "I don't pretend I'm fixing Gotham. I'm holding back the darkness one night at a time, one life at a time, because the alternative is surrender." Ahsoka thought of the Clone Wars, of battles won and planets saved only to lose them again weeks later, of the grinding exhaustion that came from fighting a war designed to never end. "You're talking about attrition warfare. Survival, not victory." "Victory isn't possible here," Batman said bluntly. "Gotham's rot runs too deep. The best I can do is prevent total collapse. Give good people enough breathing room to maybe build something better for the next generation." He pulled a grapnel gun from his belt. "That warehouse. Standard approach would be through the loading dock, neutralize guards quietly, extract victims before Black Mask realizes he's been hit. Clean, efficient, minimal casualties." But Ahsoka sensed the unspoken complication. "Black Mask learned from our previous encounters. He's rigged the entire building with explosive charges linked to dead man switches, carried by his lieutenants. If they go down, the building goes up, victims included." Batman's jaw tightened beneath the cowl. "He's betting I value those lives more than stopping him." "He's right. So we can't knock out the lieutenants without killing everyone." Ahsoka's tactical mind immediately began calculating alternatives. How many lieutenants? 4. One per floor. Controlling sections of the building. Batman projected a holographic blueprint from his gauntlet, showing a 4-story structure with victims distributed across multiple holding areas. Synchronized takedown required. Hit all 4 simultaneously. Disarm the switches before they can trigger detonation. Margin of error, less than 2 seconds. You do this alone? Ahsoka studied the building's layout, noting security positions, sight lines, probable guard rotations. Usually, sometimes with Robin or Nightwing if the operation requires multiple infiltrations. Batman's eyes fixed on her with calculating intensity. Your telekinesis. Even at reduced capacity, can you disarm a mechanical device from a distance? Ahsoka extended her hand toward a loose brick on the rooftop's edge, calling on the Force despite its strange resistance in this dimension. The brick trembled, rose slowly, and drifted toward her palm with perhaps 70% of the speed and control she'd have commanded in her own reality. Depends on the complexity. Simple mechanisms, yes. Intricate electronics, maybe. I need to see the switches. Batman produced another hologram, this one showing detailed schematics of the dead man. Devices, pressure-sensitive triggers, built into modified grenades. Fail deadly rather than fail safe. Military-grade hardware. Disarming requires either sustained pressure on the trigger or complete circuit disruption. Either option requires precision. I can do it. Ahsoka met his eyes. But you're testing me again. You wouldn't bring me here if you couldn't handle this yourself. You have other options. I do, Batman admitted. EMP grenades would fry the circuits, but they'd also kill the lights, trigger panic, potentially cause casualties in the chaos. Or I could call in Superman, who could move fast enough to disarm all 4 switches before detonation. But you asked to see Gotham's reality. This is it. Complex problems with no clean solutions. We're the right choice depends on which kind of collateral damage you're willing to accept. Ahsoka understood. This wasn't just a rescue operation. This was Batman's way of asking the question that had haunted her since leaving the Jedi Order. What are you willing to sacrifice to save lives? Where do you draw the line between pragmatism and principle? There's a third option, she said slowly. Mind working through the tactical puzzle. You and I infiltrate simultaneously, 2 teams hitting different sections. I use the Force to suppress the trigger mechanisms on 2 switches, while you disarm the other 2 mechanically. Requires perfect coordination and trust. Trust. Batman repeated the word like he was tasting something bitter. I've worked with this team for years and I still maintain contingencies in case they turn on me. You've been on Earth for less than a day. Then this is your chance to see if your assessment of me was accurate, Ahsoka said. You've been analyzing me since Metropolis. You have theories about my capabilities, my psychology, my reliability. Test them. For a long moment, Batman simply stared, and Ahsoka felt the full weight of the Dark Knight's legendary paranoia pressing against her presence. Then he moved, pulling 2 communicators from his belt and tossing one to her. Encrypted frequency. Oracle will coordinate. If you miss your timing window, people die. If you hesitate, people die. If you make a mistake, people die, Ahsoka finished. I know. I've commanded troops in combat. I understand the stakes. Batman's nod carried grudging respect. Then let's move. The infiltration was poetry written in shadows and silence. Batman moved through Gotham's darkness like he'd been born to it. Each step calculated, every movement economical. Ahsoka followed, her Jedi training translating across dimensional barriers. The Force might operate differently here, but the principles of stealth, awareness, and controlled breathing remained universal. Her montrals tracked guard positions through walls, providing spatial information that even Batman's sophisticated sensors couldn't match. 3 hostiles, ground floor corridor, she whispered into the communicator. 2 armed with automatic weapons. 1 carrying what looks like a tablet device, probably coordinating with Black Mask. Confirmed. Oracle's voice came through crystal clear, clinical and precise. Thermal imaging matches your assessment, Ahsoka. Impressive sensory capabilities. They split at the building's entrance. Batman taking the western stairwell while Ahsoka moved east. The darkness embraced her like an old friend as she ascended. Senses extended despite the Force's continued sluggishness. On the 2nd floor, she encountered her first real test. a guard making rounds. Assault rifle slung casually across his chest. Attention focused on his phone rather than his surroundings. The Jedi approach would have been a mind trick. A gentle nudge convincing the guard to look elsewhere, to forget he'd seen anything suspicious. Ahsoka reached for that familiar technique and felt the force sputter like a misfiring engine. The guard looked up, confusion crossing his features as he registered her presence. No time for subtlety. Ahsoka closed the distance in 3 swift strides, her hand striking the pressure point in his neck with precision. Anakin had drilled into her through thousands of sparring sessions. The guard dropped silently, unconscious before his brain could process what had happened. She caught his rifle before it clattered against the floor, setting both weapon and body down with practiced care. Guard down, 2nd floor east, she reported. Non-lethal. Good. Batman's voice carried approval. 3rd floor west clear. Moving to position alpha. Ahsoka continued upward. Past holding cells were frightened. Women watched her pass with expressions caught between hope and terror. She wanted to stop, to offer reassurance, to promise rescue. But training and discipline kept her moving. Extraction came after securing the building. Anything else risked the mission and everyone in it. The 4th floor housed Black Mask's command center, and one of the 4 lieutenants with a dead man's switch. Ahsoka pressed herself flat against the wall outside the door, Montrals providing perfect spatial awareness of the room beyond. One human, male, approximately 2 meters from the door, hand resting on something metallic, the trigger device. Heart rate elevated but controlled. Professional, not panicked. In position, she breathed into the communicator. Target acquired. Oracle here. I have all 4 team members on thermal. Batman, Red Hood, Ahsoka, and Batgirl. Everyone's in position. A pause. Red Hood, your target just received a phone call. He's moving toward the window. Tracking. Red Hood's voice carried the edge of someone who'd seen too much darkness and embraced it anyway. If he reaches that window and signals, we're compromised. Hold position, Batman commanded. We move on my mark. 3-2. Ahsoka called on the Force, feeling it resist before finally flowing through channels that felt increasingly familiar. Despite their strangeness, she visualized the trigger mechanism through the wall, understanding its mechanical logic through spatial awareness her Togruta biology provided. Simple pressure switch. Maintain current state. Don't let it release. 1. Execute. For doors opened simultaneously across 4 floors. Ahsoka burst through her entrance in a fluid motion that was half Jedi combat form, half pure instinct. The lieutenant's eyes widened as he registered her presence. Alien features. Dual weapons at her belt, moving with impossible speed. His thumb started to release pressure on the trigger. The Force lashed out with Ahsoka's desperate command. Invisible hands clamping down on the device's pressure plate, maintaining the circuit that held detonation at bay. The lieutenant's surprise turned to confusion as he realized the trigger wouldn't respond. That confusion lasted exactly long enough for Ahsoka to close the distance and deliver a precise strike to his solar plexus that folded him like cheap furniture. She caught the trigger device before it fell, maintaining pressure exactly as his thumb had held it. Target neutralized. Device secured. Oracle. Batman's voice held rare tension, reading all 4 locations. All switches frozen in safe position. Explosive charges disconnected. Building is secure. Relief colored Oracle's clinical tone. That was some impressive teamwork. Ahsoka carefully set the trigger device down, ensuring it remained stable, before allowing herself a moment to breathe. Through the wall, she sensed Batman moving through his section with methodical efficiency, securing guards and checking on captives. Red Hood's approach was less gentle. The sounds of impact and pained groaning suggested he viewed restraint as optional when dealing with human traffickers. 20 minutes later, the rescued women were being loaded into discrete transport vehicles, coordinated by what Oracle called the Network, a shadowy coalition of social workers, activists, and reformed criminals who specialized in helping trafficking victims disappear into new identities beyond their captors' reach. Black Mask's lieutenants were secured with zip ties and left for GCPD, while the organization's records were copied to Batman's servers for intelligence analysis. Ahsoka stood in the warehouse's main floor, watching the last of the victims depart with expressions, caught between trauma and fragile hope. An older woman, maybe 35, though suffering had aged her, paused at the door and looked back. Her eyes found Ahsoka, held them for a moment, and then she nodded. No words, just acknowledgement that someone had cared enough to come, to risk, to fight. 43 lives saved, Batman said from beside her. For tonight. It matters, Ahsoka insisted. To them, it matters. Yes. Batman's agreement carried the weight of 2 decades repeating this exact conversation with himself. That's why we keep fighting, even knowing we can't win. Because every life matters. Even when the system ensures there will always be more victims. More predators, more darkness. Red Hood approached. Helmet retracted to reveal a young face marked by old scars and older anger. Impressive work. Tano. Most people would have hesitated when that switch came into play. Hesitation kills. He glanced at Batman. She's better than half the Robins. High praise from someone who died because I trained him, Batman said. And the words carried such casual brutality that Ahsoka felt the force ripple with old pain. Jason's expression hardened, jaw clenching, before he turned and stalked toward his motorcycle without another word. That was cruel, Ahsoka observed. That was honest, Batman corrected. Jason died because the Joker beat him to death with a crowbar. He came back changed, harder, angrier. He kills criminals now, convinced that my methods enable monsters. The Dark Knight watched. Red Hood's motorcycle roar into Gotham's night. He's not entirely wrong, but he's not entirely right either. And the distance between us is built on his corpse and my failure to save him. Ahsoka thought of Anakin, of the distance that had grown between them as the Clone Wars ground on, as the Jedi became soldiers and the Republic became a military state. She thought of the last time she'd seen him, before everything had fallen apart, when his eyes had still held warmth, rather than the cold fury that would eventually consume him. Gotham breaks people, she said quietly. Gotham reveals people, Batman corrected. It strips away pretense and shows you who you really are under pressure. Some people discover their heroes. Others discover their monsters. Most discover they're somewhere in between, trying to survive in a city designed to destroy hope. And you? Ahsoka turned to face the Dark Knight directly. What did Gotham reveal about you? Batman's expression beneath the cowl remained unreadable, but his voice carried something that might have been dark humor. That I'm crazy enough to think one man in a cape can make a difference. That I'm stubborn enough to keep trying even when logic says it's impossible. That I'm broken enough to find purpose in other people's pain. He started toward the warehouse exit. You did well tonight. Better than I expected. You maintained control under pressure. You adapted to unfamiliar variables. And you saved lives without compromising your principles. But Ahsoka heard the unspoken qualifier. But Gotham was gentle with you tonight, Batman said. You faced a tactical problem with a clear solution. Next time, the choice might be between 2 evils. Between letting one person die to save 5, or risking everyone to save that one. Between pulling the trigger on someone who deserves death, or letting them live to kill again. He paused at the threshold. That's when you'll discover what Gotham reveals about Ahsoka Tano. As they left the warehouse and ascended to Gotham's rooftops, Ahsoka felt the Force whisper warnings. Through this strange dimension's mystical currents, Batman had tested her competence tonight and found it adequate. But he'd also shown her the truth about this world's darkness, that it was deeper and more pervasive than anything she'd faced in the Clone Wars, that it would keep testing her principles until it found the breaking point. Somewhere in the city below, the Joker laughed in his cell at Arkham Asylum, already planning his next escape. Somewhere else, Lex Luthor watched satellite feeds of the Watchtower and calculated how to exploit this new variable in Earth's heroic equation, and far beyond Earth's atmosphere. In the fire pits of Apocalypse, Darkseid studied the dimensional rift's signature and began preparing his furies for acquisition. The galaxy far, far away had taught Ahsoka that darkness was a constant enemy requiring eternal vigilance. But Gotham was teaching her that sometimes darkness wore a hero's face, that the line between justice and vengeance was drawn in shifting sand, and that maintaining your principles in a universe of moral ambiguity required strength that transcended any Force technique the Jedi had ever taught. She stood on the rooftop beside Batman as rain continued to fall, washing nothing clean and wondered if she was strong enough for what was coming. The dimensional breach opened. Above Star City with the sound of reality. Screaming, a sonic tear that shattered windows for 3 blocks and sent tremors through the force that snapped. Ahsoka awake in the Wayne Manor guest room where she'd been, attempting meditation. She was moving before conscious thought engaged. Lightsabers maglocked to her belt as she sprinted through hallways that Alfred had carefully mapped for her the previous evening. Batman was already in the cave, cowl pulled back to reveal Bruce Wayne's grim expression as he studied holographic projections that showed a swirling vortex of energy above Oliver Queen's city. Boom tube, he said without preamble. But the signature's wrong. Too much dimensional instability. Like something forced the aperture open from the other side. That's how I arrived, Ahsoka said, recognizing the cascading energy patterns that matched her own. Violent transit across realities. Except this is controlled. Deliberate. Dark side. Batman's jaw tightened as the hologram refined, showing massive humanoid shapes emerging from the vortex. He's been quiet since the watchtower detected your arrival. I should have known he was planning something. His fingers flew across the console, opening communication channels. Justice League, Priority Alpha. Apocalypse Incursion, Star City. All available members respond. Superman's voice crackled through immediately. Tension evident even across the digital compression. I'm 2 minutes out. Diana's with me. Hal's in space dealing with a situation on OA, but John Stewart is en route. The Furies, another voice added, Cyborg. His tone carrying the weight of someone who'd interfaced directly with Motherbox technology and understood its implications. I'm reading for distinct new god signatures. Darkseid sent his elite. Ahsoka felt ice crystallize in her chest. She'd heard the briefings about Apocalypse, about the Lord of Tyranny who sought to eliminate free will across the universe through the anti-life equation. But hearing about cosmic threats and facing them were different experiences entirely, as she'd learned during the Clone Wars when abstract strategic concerns became very concrete when armies arrived to kill you. Why Star City? She asked. What's his objective? Batman's expression darkened further. Your dimensional signature is unique, radiating energy that doesn't exist in this reality. To Darkseid, you're either a weapon to claim or a threat to eliminate. He pulled his cowl up, transforming from Bruce Wayne into the Dark Knight in one fluid motion. The Furies won't come alone. Parademons, shock troops, possibly a full invasion force if he's decided. Earth needs conquering today. He moved toward the Batmobile. Stay here. Wayne Manor has defenses that can withstand. No. Ahsoka's voice cut through his command with the authority of a commander who'd led battalions. If Darkseid came for me, then hiding while others fight my battle isn't an option. That's not who I am. You're operating at 85% capacity in an unfamiliar dimension against new gods whose power rivals Superman's, Batman countered, though his tone suggested he'd expected this response. This isn't a tactical operation against human traffickers. The Furies are functionally immortal warriors who've conquered thousands of worlds. They will kill you if given the opportunity. Then I'll make sure they don't get that opportunity. Ahsoka moved toward the vehicle hangar where she'd seen the various Bat vehicles stored. I survived Order 66, fought Sith Inquisitors, and walked away from the Jedi Order when it would have been easier to stay. I don't need full power to be dangerous, and I'm not letting innocent people die because some tyrant decided. I'm interesting. Batman studied her for a moment, and Ahsoka recognized the assessment occurring behind those white lenses, calculating her capabilities, weighing her determination, deciding whether she was an asset or liability. Finally, he gestured toward the Batwing. You fly that thing. We can reach Star City in 12 minutes. Don't make me regret this. The flight was a blur of G-forces and barely controlled velocity as Ahsoka pushed the Batwing's engines to their limits. Batman's running commentary provided tactical intelligence. The Furies consisted of Granny Goodness, Lashina, Stampa, and Mad Harriet, each a master warrior trained in Apocalypse's brutal schools, each augmented with technology that made them competitive with metahumans. The Parademons were cannon fodder, genetically engineered shock troops that felt no fear and showed no mercy. Your lightsabers will cut through Parademons easily enough, Batman said, reviewing weapons specifications on his gauntlet display. But the Furies have personal shields powered by Motherbox derivatives. You'll need sustained attacks to penetrate their defenses. What about Superman? Ahsoka asked, threading the Batwing through a gap between buildings that definitely wasn't designed for that maneuver. Can't he just? Darkseid's Omega beams can track Superman across dimensions and disintegrate matter at the molecular level, Batman interrupted. The Furies carry weapons designed to hurt Kryptonians. Superman is powerful, but he's not invulnerable. None of us are. He paused as new data scrolled across his display. Diana reports they've engaged. Granny Goodness is targeting civilians, using hostages to limit our response options. Of course she was. Ahsoka had faced similar tactics during the Clone Wars, separatist droids using civilians as shields, forcing Jedi to choose between saving innocents and achieving strategic objectives. It was effective precisely because it exploited the fundamental difference between heroes and monsters. Heroes valued individual lives. Monsters viewed them as expendable resources. Star City's skyline erupted into view, smoke rising from multiple impact points where boom tubes had deposited apocalypse forces directly into population centers. The Batwing sensors painted a grim picture. Estimated 300 parademons distributed across a 6-block radius, with the 4 Furies forming a perimeter around what looked like some kind of technological construct being assembled in the city's central plaza. They're building a boom tube generator, Batman said, his voice tight with concern. Permanent dimensional gateway. If they complete it, Darkseid can pour unlimited forces directly into Earth's heart. Then we stop them from completing it, Ahsoka said, bringing the Batwing into a controlled dive that would have terrified most pilots. Where do you need me? Northeast quadrant. Granny Goodness has 40 civilians trapped in an office building. She's threatening to collapse the structure if we interfere with the generator construction. Batman was already prepping his grapnel gun. Superman and Diana are holding the perimeter, keeping parademons from spreading beyond containment. Jon Stewart is trying to dismantle the generator, but Lasheena's keeping him occupied. I'm going after the generator's power core. That leaves Granny Goodness for me, Ahsoka said, understanding the tactical distribution. You're putting me against one of Darkseid's elite. I'm trusting you to save 40 lives while the rest of us handle the existential threat to Earth. Batman met her eyes. Can you do it? Ahsoka thought of the Clone Wars, of impossible missions and overwhelming odds, of the times when Anakin had looked at her and asked if she could hold a position against 1,000 droids while he completed some insane flanking maneuver. She thought of how many times she'd said yes, and how many times she'd delivered on that promise through skill, determination, and absolute refusal to accept failure. I can do it, she said. The Batwing's exit was less landing and more controlled crash as Ahsoka ejected at 200 feet, using the force to cushion her descent despite its continued sluggishness. She hit the street rolling, lightsabers igniting in mid-motion, white blades humming as parademons immediately swarmed her position. The creatures were nightmares made. Flesh, twisted humanoid forms, with too many teeth and eyes that held nothing, resembling sentience, just primal hunger and engineered obedience. Her first strike bisected 3 of them in a single flowing arc, plasma blades cutting through chitin armor like it was paper. The Jedi had taught her Form V, the way of strength and determination, turning defense into overwhelming counterattack. Anakin had refined that teaching through countless battles, showing her how aggression could be channeled into precision, how fury could serve justice when properly controlled. The parademons learned quickly that swarming wouldn't work. They shifted tactics, attacking from multiple vectors simultaneously, trying to overwhelm her spatial awareness. But her montrals provided 360-degree perception that no amount of numbers could overcome. She moved through the swarm like a dancer performing a lethal ballet, each step calculated, each strike eliminating threats with minimal wasted motion. Above the chaos, she heard the distinctive crack of Omega beams and Superman's pained grunt as one grazed his shoulder. Heard wonder. Woman's battle cry as the lasso of truth wrapped around Stampa's massive frame. Heard the emerald energy of a Green Lantern construct shattering against Lasheena's whip strikes. The Justice League was fighting at full capacity, and they were barely holding the line. The office building loomed ahead, its lower floors crawling with parademons while the upper stories showed signs of structural damage. Ahsoka could sense the civilians inside, their terror, their desperation, their fragile hope that somehow, impossibly, rescue would come. And standing at the building's entrance, massive and grotesque in her armored bulk, was Granny Goodness. The Fury was exactly as the briefing had described, 3 meters of enhanced muscle and cybernetic augmentation. Her face twisted into a permanent scowl that suggested cruelty was her default expression. She held what looked like a massive staff crackling with red energy. And when she saw Ahsoka approaching through the thinning parademon swarm, her grin revealed metal teeth filed to points. Well, Granny's voice was surprisingly maternal, which somehow made it more disturbing. The dimensional anomaly comes to play. Darkseid will be pleased when I deliver you to Apocalypse in pieces. She hefted her staff. Nothing personal, dearie. You're just too interesting to leave running around. I'm not interested in trading threats, Ahsoka said, settling into a combat stance that combined Jedi readiness with the practical adaptations she'd learned during years of real warfare. Release the civilians, and I'll let you walk away. Granny's laughter was like grinding metal. Oh, you're adorable. Thinks she can bargain with Granny Goodness, does she? The staff's energy intensified. Here's my counteroffer. Surrender now, and I'll make your death quick. Resist, and I'll make those civilians watch while I pull you apart slowly. The Force whispered warnings through Ahsoka's awareness. Danger from above, from the sides, from vectors she couldn't immediately identify. Granny Goodness hadn't survived millennia of conquest by being straightforward. There would be traps, contingencies, tactical advantages already prepared for exactly this confrontation. But Ahsoka hadn't survived the Clone Wars, the Jedi Purge, and years of independent operation by being predictable either. She moved, not toward Granny. That would have been expected. Instead, Ahsoka threw herself sideways, using the Force to enhance the leap beyond human capability, landing on the side of a parked hover vehicle, and immediately launching from there toward the building's second-story window. Granny's staff strike demolished the space where Ahsoka had been standing, cratering pavement with enough force to pulverize bone. Clever girl, Granny called out, genuine approval in her tone. Darkseid does love his weapons smart. Ahsoka crashed through the window, rolled across office carpeting, and came up running. Her montrals mapped the buildings. Interior, civilians clustered. On the 7th floor, structural damage concentrated on the support columns. Explosives placed at strategic points throughout the lower levels. Granny had set up a dead man's switch variation, except instead of a trigger, she'd rigged the building to collapse if she was defeated. Classic hostage situation. Impossible choice. Stop Granny and the building falls, or let her continue supporting Darkseid's invasion. Unless there was a third option. Ahsoka reached the stairwell and started ascending. Senses extended despite the Force's resistance. She could feel Granny following. Heavy footsteps shaking the structure. Parademon reinforcements flooding in from outside. Time was the enemy here. Every second she spent in this building was. Another second the boom tube generator moved toward completion. Another second Darkseid's forces entrenched themselves in Earth's reality. The 7th floor held the civilians. And their expressions. When Ahsoka burst through the stairwell door ranged from terror to desperate hope. 40 people, just like Batman had said. Men, women, children. Office workers who'd been in the wrong place when interdimensional warfare decided. Star City made an excellent battlefield. I'm here to get you out, Ahsoka said, projecting calm confidence she didn't entirely feel. But I need you to trust me and move quickly when I say. There's a monster downstairs, a woman said, her voice shaking. She said if we try to leave, she'll kill us all. She's about to be too busy to make good on that threat, Ahsoka replied, moving to the window. 7 stories up, no fire escape, structural integrity compromised. But the Force, sluggish as it was, could still cushion falls if she concentrated enough energy. When I give the signal, everyone jumps. I know that sounds insane, but trust me. The civilians stared at her like she'd lost her mind, which was fair. But then a young man in a business suit stepped forward, took his daughter's hand, and said, if you're with the Justice League, then I trust you. He looked at the others. She came for us. That's more than anyone else has done. Sometimes courage was contagious. The civilians began moving toward the windows, terrified but determined, choosing to trust the alien warrior with the glowing swords over the certainty of death at Granny Goodness's hands. The building shuddered as Granny's staff struck somewhere below, and Ahsoka felt structural supports beginning to fail. Out of time. Now, she shouted. Everyone out. Trust the Force. They jumped, 40 people throwing themselves from a 7-story building in an act of faith that would have made the Jedi Council proud if any of them had still been alive to see it. Ahsoka jumped last, calling on the Force with every ounce of will and desperation she possessed, spreading her awareness across all 41 falling bodies and cushioning their descent with telekinetic energy that strained her adapted connection to its absolute limit. They hit the ground hard but survivable, civilians rolling and groaning but alive, bones unbroken through some combination of Ahsoka's power and blind luck. She landed last, knees buckling from the exertion, lightsabers deactivating as she tried to catch her breath. "Run," she gasped to the civilians. "Get clear of the building." They ran, and Ahsoka turned to face the structure as Granny Goodness emerged from the entrance, staff crackling with murder, her expression caught between rage and respect. "Impressive. Stupid, but impressive." She raised the staff. "Pity you're about to die tired." The energy blast should have disintegrated Ahsoka. Would have, if Superman hadn't materialized between them at speeds that defied human perception, his body absorbing the impact that would have killed 100 normal humans. The Man of Steel staggered but held his ground, cape singed and smoking, his expression carrying the weight of someone who'd tanked planet-destroying weapons and lived to discuss the experience. "I think that's enough," Superman said, and his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd broken gods and monsters across his knee when they threatened innocence. "Stand down, or I will make you stand down." Granny's response was a laugh and an Omega beam from a device mounted on her staff, smaller scale than Darkseid's personal weapons, but still capable of tracking and killing. Superman dodged, barely, the beam carving a molten trench through pavement where he'd been standing. Then Wonder Woman was there, and Green Lantern, and Batman descending from above with explosive batarangs that targeted the building's structural supports with calculated precision. The boom tube generator exploded in the distance, Cyborg's voice on comms confirming successful sabotage of the power core. The battle turned. Granny Goodness, recognizing defeat, triggered her own boom tube retreat. The remaining Furies followed, dragging injured parademons through dimensional portals that snapped shut with sounds like reality, sighing in relief. Star City was saved. Earth was saved. And Ahsoka Tano had just fought alongside the Justice League against Apocalypse itself, had saved 40 lives, while operating at reduced capacity in an unfamiliar dimension, and had proven beyond any doubt that she belonged here. Superman approached, extending a hand. That was incredible. All of it, the tactical thinking, the rescue, the courage to jump from a 7-story building to save people you'd never met. His smile carried warmth that reminded Ahsoka painfully of Anakin before the darkness had claimed him. "Welcome to the team." "I'm not on the team," Ahsoka said automatically, though she took the offered hand. "I'm an independent ally." "Right," Superman said, and his expression suggested he thought that distinction was adorable. "An independent ally who just fought alongside us, saved civilians, and helped repel an apocalypse invasion." He looked at Diana and Batman. "What do you two think? Does she sound like a Justice League member to you?" "She sounds like a warrior who hasn't accepted what she already is," Diana said, and her smile carried the recognition of someone who saw herself reflected in another's stubbornness. "But she'll figure it out eventually." Ahsoka wanted to argue, to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to claim after leaving the Jedi Order. But as she stood among these heroes, these gods and mortals who'd chosen to protect rather than conquer, to serve rather than rule, she felt something shift in her, understanding of what it meant to be part of something larger than herself. The Jedi Order had been broken because it valued the institution over the individual, protocol over principle, political stability over justice. But the Justice League, for all its flaws and complications, seemed to understand that unity didn't require conformity. that strength came from diversity rather than rigid adherence to doctrine. Maybe, just maybe, this was what the Jedi Order should have been all along. If I join, Ahsoka said carefully, I'm still maintaining my independence. I'm still making my own moral judgments. And if the League ever tries to force me into a choice between what's right and what's politically convenient, then you walk away, Batman finished. And his tone carried understanding, earned through his own struggles with authority, just like the rest of us would. That's not a contingency, Tano. That's a requirement. As emergency services flooded Star City and the civilians sheet, Save began giving interviews to media outlets that would make her face famous across Earth by morning. Ahsoka felt the Force whisper through this dimension's strange channels with an emotion she hadn't experienced since her earliest days as Anakin's Padawan. Hope tempered by wisdom, strength refined by understanding, and the profound recognition that sometimes walking away from a broken institution was the first step toward finding where you truly belonged. The galaxy far, far away had shaped her, but this universe of gods and shadows, hope and darkness, heroes and monsters would test whether that shaping had created someone strong enough to stand among legends. The Watchtower's meditation chamber floated at the station's edge, a crystalline sphere offering unobstructed views of Earth's curve and the infinite darkness beyond. Ahsoka sat cross-legged in its center, eyes closed, breathing synchronized with the rhythm she'd learned as a youngling in the Jedi Temple. 4 counts in. Hold for 4 counts out. The Force flowed through her with increasing fluidity, adapting to this dimension's mystical framework through sheer repetition and stubborn determination. 3 weeks had passed since Star City. 3 weeks of training with Zatanna to translate Force techniques into DC's magical language, of sparring with Wonder Woman to test her combat skills against divine strength, of running tactical simulations with Batman that always seemed to end with him revealing some new contingency plan she'd failed to anticipate. 3 weeks of slowly, grudgingly accepting that maybe the Justice League wasn't the Jedi Order, and maybe that distinction mattered. The Force operates at approximately 96% of your reported baseline capacity. Dr. Fate's voice resonated through the chamber, layered with the ancient intelligence that inhabited Naboo's helmet. The Lord of Order floated nearby, golden armor gleaming in starlight. Your adaptation to this dimension's thaumaturgic framework proceeds faster than anticipated. Within days, you will achieve full integration. It still feels wrong, Ahsoka admitted, opening her eyes to regard the enigmatic figure. Like I'm speaking a language that sounds right, but uses different grammar. The power's there, but accessing it requires conscious effort instead of instinct. Instinct is merely deeply ingrained pattern recognition. Fate replied, drifting closer. You will develop new instincts, new patterns. The Force will become as natural here as it was in your origin dimension. The helmet tilted, ancient eyes studying her with interest that transcended human curiosity. Though I confess fascination with what you represent, a dimensional refugee adapting to fundamentally different universal constants. Your very existence challenges assumptions about the malleability of metaphysical bonds. I'm just trying to survive, Ahsoka said, and maybe help people while I figure out how to get home. Do you wish to return? The question carried weight, as though Fate already knew the answer and was testing whether she recognized it herself. Your home galaxy faces the Empire's tyranny, the Jedi Order's extinction, and conflicts that will shape civilizations for generations. Here, you found allies, purpose, and perhaps something your previous existence lacked: the freedom to define yourself without institutional authority dictating your path. Ahsoka thought of Anakin, of the 501st, of the few friends she'd maintained contact with after leaving the Order. She thought of the growing rebellion, of planets suffering under Imperial occupation, of the knowledge that she'd abandoned her galaxy at a time when Force-sensitive warriors were desperately needed. But she also thought of the Watchtower, of morning sparring sessions with Diana where philosophy and combat intertwined, of Batman's gruff approval when she'd solved a tactical puzzle he'd designed to be unsolvable, of Superman's genuine warmth and the way he treated her as an equal despite power that could reshape continents. I don't know, she admitted. The Empire needs to be stopped. But I walked away from one war already because I realized the Jedi were fighting for the wrong reasons. Going back means rejoining a conflict, where the lines between right and wrong have only gotten blurrier. And here, the lines are clear? Fate's tone suggested gentle skepticism. Here, the lines are honest about being blurry, Ahsoka corrected. Batman doesn't pretend his methods are pure. Diana acknowledges that sometimes warriors must kill. Superman admits his power could corrupt him, that he's one bad day away from becoming Injustice Superman. She stood, pacing the chamber's perimeter. The Jedi claimed moral superiority while serving politicians. The League admits its limitations while genuinely trying to protect people. That honesty matters. Fate nodded slowly, ancient intelligence processing her words through millennia of perspective. You've found wisdom and humility rather than certainty. Perhaps this dimension has taught you what your order could not. He turned toward the viewport, golden armor reflecting Earth's blue-green beauty. Though I must warn you, the peace you've found here is temporary. Darkseid's interest in your dimensional signature has not waned. His defeat in Star City was merely reconnaissance, a probe to assess your capabilities and the League's response. You think he'll try again, Ahsoka said, recognizing the warning for what it was. I know he will, Fate replied. The Lord of Apocalypse does not abandon objectives. He studies, adapts, and returns with overwhelming force. The helmet turned back to her. When that occurs, you will face a choice that defines your place in this dimension's fate. Stand with the League as a true member, or maintain your distance as an independent ally who may flee. When the stakes become existential. Before Ahsoka could respond, the Watchtower's alert system screamed through every corridor and chamber with urgency that sent ice through her veins. She was running before the announcement completed, Dr. Fate keeping pace through simple, mystical teleportation. The command center was chaos controlled by practiced discipline. Superman stood at the central holo display, jaw tight as he processed incoming data. Batman worked 3 consoles simultaneously, fingers flying across keyboards with mechanical precision. Diana checked her weapons with the casual efficiency of someone who'd armed for Apocalypse 1,000 times. Cyborg interfaced directly with the Watchtower's sensors, his mechanical eye glowing bright as raw data streamed through his consciousness. Multiple boom tube signatures, Cyborg reported, voice strained. Earth orbit, Moon's dark side, Mars orbit, Jupiter space. Darkseid isn't probing this time. He's launching a full invasion. The holographic display showed what Cyborg described, dimensional rifts tearing open across the solar system, each one vomiting forth waves of parademons, apocalypse warships, and signatures that registered as high-level new god entities. The scope was staggering, representing military force capable of conquering civilizations. He's moving to claim Earth before we can fortify further, Batman said, his tone carrying grim certainty. The dimensional refugee was his excuse. Now he's executing a conquest he's been planning for years. How long until the first wave reaches Earth? Superman asked, already moving toward the teleporter that would transport him to engagement range. For hours for the Vanguard, Cyborg replied. 8 hours for the main force. Darkseid himself is on the command ship. I'm reading his Omega signature at the fleet center. For hours to prepare for Armageddon. For hours before the Lord of Apocalypse personally arrived to subjugate Earth, eliminate the Justice League, and claim Ahsoka as either weapon or corpse. We need every available hero, Diana said, already activating communication protocols. Justice League, Teen Titans, Justice Society if they. LL answer. Every vigilante and metahuman we can reach. This isn't a skirmish. This is the war we've been dreading. The Green Lantern Corps? Superman looked at the display showing Hal Jordan's last known position, Sector 2814, 3 solar systems away. Can they provide reinforcements? They're dealing with a Sinestro Corps offensive in the Vega system. Cyborg said, frustration evident. Hal and John are both engaged. We're on our own. Ahsoka felt the weight of responsibility, settling across her shoulders, like a physical burden. This invasion existed because her dimensional signature had attracted Darkseid's attention, because her presence had marked Earth as interesting, enough to conquer immediately. rather than remain on the new God's long-term acquisition list. This is my fault, she said quietly. He came because of me. He came because he's a tyrant who conquers worlds. Batman corrected sharply, his tone cutting through her self-recrimination with surgical precision. You're his excuse, not his motivation. Darkseid has wanted Earth for decades. You just moved up his timetable. He pulled up tactical projections, showing probable invasion routes. Which means we use that. He wants you, fine. We make you the bait that lures him into a trap. Bruce, Superman's warning tone suggested this was an argument they'd had before. She's a warrior who survived a galactic civil war, Batman interrupted. Don't insult her by pretending she can't handle being the tactical focal point. Ahsoka, can you face Darkseid in direct combat? Ahsoka thought about the briefings, about Omega beams that could disintegrate Superman, about strength that had shattered Wonder Woman's bones, about a will so absolute it sought to eliminate free choice from the universe itself. She thought about her lightsabers, her Force abilities approaching full capacity, her training under Anakin Skywalker, who'd been one of the greatest warriors the Jedi Order had ever produced. Before his fall, I can face him, she said. Whether I can beat him is another question. You don't need to beat him, Batman said. Tactical diagrams already forming around Ahsoka's projected position. You need to survive long enough for the rest of us to execute the Hellbat protocol. Superman's expression darkened. Bruce, we agreed that was a last resort. An invasion force led by Darkseid himself qualifies as last resort. Batman replied. The Hellbat armor was designed specifically to let me fight new gods. It will work. It will also kill you, Diana said. And her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen the armor specifications and understood its cost. The power requirements alone are manageable for approximately 7 minutes before my body starts breaking down. Batman finished. Which is why the timing needs to be perfect. Ahsoka draws Darkseid's attention, keeps him focused while we evacuate civilians and position strike teams. When Darkseid commits to eliminating her personally, I engage with Hellbat. 7 minutes to hurt him badly enough that he retreats. And if you can't hurt him in 7 minutes? Ahsoka asked, though she already knew the answer. Then Earth falls and I die trying to prevent it. Batman said with the casual matter-of-factness of someone who'd accepted mortality as tactical variable years ago. But that's not going to happen, because you're going to give me those 7 minutes. Can you do it? Ahsoka thought of the Clone Wars, of holding positions against impossible odds while Anakin executed insane strategies that somehow worked. She thought of fighting Grievous, of dueling Ventress, of standing against the darkness that had consumed everything she'd once believed in and emerging scarred but unbroken. I can do it, she said. But I need something first. Zatanna's sanctum aboard the Watchtower was a space that defied normal physics, larger inside than its dimensions suggested, filled with artifacts and mystical tools that radiated power in ways Ahsoka's adapted Force sense could now appreciate. The sorceress stood before a workbench covered in glowing runes, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air as she chanted backward speech incantations. You want a Force amplifier? Zatanna said without turning around, somehow aware of Ahsoka's presence despite the silent approach. Something to push your adapted connection beyond its current limitations. Darkseid is a god, Ahsoka replied. I need every advantage I can find. Gods can bleed. Zatanna turned, holding a crystal that pulsed, with energy that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. The Force translated through DC's magical framework, captured and concentrated. Dr. Fate and I have been working on this since you arrived. It's a mystical focus attuned specifically to your dimensional signature, designed to amplify and stabilize your Force connection in this reality. She handed the crystal to Ahsoka, who felt power surge through her the moment skin contacted the artifact. The Force roared to full strength, no longer sluggish or resistant, flowing through channels that finally understood how to navigate this dimension's metaphysical landscape. Telekinesis snapped into crystal clarity, precognition sharpened to combat applicable precision, and the augmentation of physical abilities that made Jedi superhuman even among Force users returned to its full potential. This is incredible, Ahsoka breathed, feeling complete for the first time since arriving in this reality. I'm at full capacity, maybe beyond. The crystal won't last forever, Zatanna warned. It's burning through stored mystical energy to maintain the amplification. You'll have maybe 30 minutes of full power before it exhausts itself and your connection returns to its adapted baseline. She met Ahsoka's eyes. 30 minutes to face a god. Use them wisely. Ahsoka integrated the crystal into a bracer she'd constructed from Watchtower materials, feeling its power pulse in sync with her heartbeat. 30 minutes of full force capacity against Darkseid himself. 30 minutes to prove that a warrior from a distant galaxy could stand among Earth's mightiest heroes and emerge worthy of the title. Thank you, she said to Zatanna, for everything. The training, the crystal, the trust. Don't thank me yet, Zatanna replied, her expression carrying concern. Survive this, then we'll talk about gratitude. In the meantime, remember what Constantine told you during your mysticism training. Sometimes the only way to win against overwhelming power is to cheat better than the other guy. The battle began precisely 4 hours later, exactly as Cyborg had predicted. The Vanguard arrived in Earth orbit trailing fire and fury, 100 of Parade Mon shock troopers, supported by Apocalypse warships that bristled with weapons capable of cracking continents. The Justice League met them at the atmospheric boundary, Superman leading the charge with Diana at his side and a coalition of Earth's heroes spreading across engagement zones like a defensive net woven from desperation and determination. Ahsoka stood on the Watchtower's observation deck, watching the battle unfold through viewports and holographic displays. She saw Superman punch through a warship's hull and emerge from the other side, trailing debris. Saw Wonder Woman's lasso wrap around a Parade Mon wing commander and hurl it into the void. Saw Green Lantern constructs. John Stewart had abandoned his prior engagement. Earth's peril superseding core protocol form. Barriers that held back waves of enemies that would have overwhelmed any single defender. Your position, Batman's voice came through her calm, already wearing the Hellbat armor that made him look like something from Nightmare given form. Eastern Seaboard, Metropolis Harbor. Darkseid will make landfall there within the hour. The location is clear of civilians, gives you maneuvering room, and positions you where I can reach you quickly once he's committed. Understood, Ahsoka said, igniting her lightsabers in preparation. Batman, if this goes wrong. It won't, he interrupted. Because we don't accept failure as an option. Now move. The teleport to Metropolis was instantaneous and disorienting. One moment, the Watchtower. The next, standing on cracked pavement, with the harbor spreading before her and Superman's city rising behind her, evacuated and silent as a tomb. The sky burned with distant explosions as the League held the line in orbit, buying time for Earth's defenders to organize, for civilians to reach shelters, for Batman's insane plan to have even a remote chance of working. Then the sky tore open directly above her, and Darkseid descended. The Lord of Apocalypse was exactly as terrible as the briefings had suggested. 3 meters of armored malevolence. His stone-gray skin carved with the scars of 1,000 conquests. His eyes burning with Omega energy that promised death and worse. He landed with enough force to crack the dock beneath his feet, and the sheer pressure of his presence made reality feel smaller, compressed by will so absolute it bordered on fundamental force. The dimensional anomaly. Darkseid's voice was granite grinding against eternity, carrying the weight of civilizations crushed beneath his heel. You have attracted my attention, which is either the greatest fortune or worst tragedy to befall your insignificant existence. He took one step forward, and that single movement carried the threat of inevitable doom. I am Darkseid. I am the revelation, the Tiger Force at the core of all things. When you cry out in your dreams, it is Darkseid that you see. I'm Ahsoka Tano, she replied, settling into combat stance with lightsabers raised. And I don't dream about tyrants. I fight them. Darkseid's smile was terrible. Bravado. How refreshing. Most species grovel before the end. You choose defiance. He raised one massive hand, Omega energy crackling around his fingers. I will savor your destruction. The Omega beams lanced out with speed that defied physics, targeting energy that could track across dimensions and disintegrate Superman himself. Ahsoka threw herself sideways, calling on the Force with the crystal's amplification, singing through her veins, moving faster than her body had ever achieved before. The beams carved molten trenches through pavement where she'd been standing, then curved impossibly to follow her movement. She'd studied the briefings. Omega beams didn't miss. They tracked until they hit their target or Darkseid dismissed them. The only defense was avoidance. Keep moving. Never let them establish a lock. Use the environment and superior speed to stay ahead of death, traveling at light speed. Ahsoka leapt toward a crane container, bounced off its surface, launched from there to a warehouse roof, and dove through a window before the beams could adjust trajectory. Glass exploded around her, the Omega energy missing by centimeters, near enough that she felt its heat singe her montrals. Impressive, Darkseid's voice echoed across the harbor. Your agility exceeds human baseline. But you cannot flee forever, child. Apocalypse claims all who resist. He was right. She couldn't win through evasion alone. The crystal gave her 30 minutes, already. 5 had elapsed in desperate dodging. She needed to shift from reactive defense to active offense. Needed to hurt Darkseid badly enough that Batman's window remained viable. Ahsoka burst from the warehouse's opposite side, lightsabers blazing, and drove straight toward Darkseid with the Force amplifying her speed to a white-hot blur. She struck high and low simultaneously, Jarkai, the dual-blade technique. Anakin had taught her during the Clone Wars, targeting joints and weak points with precision that had felled countless enemies. Her lightsabers met Darkseid's stone skin and stopped cold, plasma meeting resistance that shouldn't exist. The new god didn't even bother blocking. He simply endured, letting her strike with full power. And when the lightsabers failed to penetrate, he backhanded her with casual contempt. The impact was like being hit by a building. Ahsoka flew backward, crashed through a storage container, and only the Force cushioning absorbed enough damage to prevent every bone from shattering. She rolled to her feet, tasting blood, ribs screaming protest. You strike like a warrior, Darkseid observed, stalking forward with the inevitability of tectonic drift. But you are mortal, and I am beyond mortality. Your weapons cannot harm me. Your power cannot stop me. You exist only because I permit it. He raised both hands, Omega energy intensifying. And I tire of this sport. Both beams launched simultaneously, tracking from different angles, giving her nowhere to dodge. Ahsoka did the only thing she could. She threw everything into a Force barrier, every ounce of amplified power the crystal provided, creating a telekinetic shield that had held against artillery during the Clone Wars. The Omega beams hit her shield and punched through like it was paper. One grazed her shoulder, and Ahsoka screamed as molecular dissolution began eating through armor and flesh. The other missed by inches, near enough that the radiant heat left burns across her side. She collapsed to one knee, breathing hard, shoulder bleeding from a wound that smoked with residual Omega energy. 15 minutes elapsed, still needed to hold Darkseid's attention for another 10. Somehow, while injured and outmatched by a being whose casual strikes could pulverize diamond. You have courage, Darkseid said, and his tone carried something that might have been respect if filtered through the perspective of absolute tyranny. More than most who face me, in another existence, you might have served Apocalypse well. He raised his hand for the killing strike. But courage without power is merely futile. Superman hit Darkseid like a meteor, moving at speeds that broke sound barriers and generated sonic booms that shattered every remaining window. Across the harbor, the Man of Steel's punch connected with Darkseid's jaw hard, enough to send the new god skidding backward, stone feet carving trenches through pavement. You're fighting all of us, Superman said, positioning himself between Ahsoka and Darkseid, cape billowing in the wind generated by their clash. And we don't abandon our own. Diana materialized on Ahsoka's opposite side, sword drawn, expression, carrying the cold fury of a warrior goddess who decided someone needed killing. Can you stand? She asked without taking her eyes off Darkseid. I can stand, Ahsoka confirmed, forcing herself upright despite the agony radiating from her shoulder. But lightsabers don't work against him. He's too durable. Then we adjust tactics, Diana said, and launched herself at Darkseid with the God-Killer sword leading. The blade, forged specifically to slay divine entities, struck the new god's armor and actually penetrated, drawing the first blood of the engagement. Darkseid's roar shook buildings. Insolent Amazon, I crushed your people once before. I will do so again. He caught Diana's wrist, twisted with enough force to fracture bone, and threw her toward the harbor with strength that would have killed normal humans. Superman intercepted, catching Diana mid-flight, setting her down gently before returning to the engagement. The two titans clashed, trading blows that generated shockwaves, each strike carrying enough energy to level city blocks. They were evenly matched, Superman's Kryptonian might against Darkseid's new god durability, and the battle would have been magnificent, if not for the horrifying reality that even Superman was slowly losing ground. Ahsoka watched, tactical mind racing. 20 minutes had elapsed. Batman needed 3 more. But Superman was flagging, Diana was injured, and she'd proven lightsabers couldn't hurt Darkseid. They needed something else, some advantage that the Force whispered, and Ahsoka remembered Constantine's advice. Sometimes you cheat. She reached out with the Force, not toward Darkseid, but beneath him. The harbor was built on fill dirt, constructed over original seabed, structurally stable, but not designed for the kind of impacts currently hammering it. Ahsoka found the support pillars holding up the dock, found the concrete already fractured from Darkseid's landing, found the weakness that everyone else had overlooked, and pulled. The dock collapsed beneath Darkseid's feet. Centuries of stone and concrete and steel giving way all at once, dropping the new god 20 meters into harbor water with enough force to generate a tidal wave. He surfaced immediately, Omega beams already firing. But the momentary disorientation had broken his attention lock on Superman. Now, Ahsoka screamed into her calm. He's committed. Batman now. The Hellbat armor arrived like Apocalypse given form. Batman descending from the sky, wreathed in power that made the air itself scream protest. The armor was nightmare technology, incorporating elements from every League member's abilities. Kryptonian solar absorption, speed force enhancement, Amazonian mysticism, Atlantean resilience, and Wayne ingenuity, binding it all together into something that could let a human fight gods for. Exactly 7 minutes before the power killed him, Batman hit Darkseid with a haymaker that sent the new god crashing through the submerged dock's remains and into bedrock beneath. Apocalypse underestimated Earth. Batman's voice echoed from the armor, distorted by power that threatened to tear him apart even as it made him unstoppable. That was your first mistake. He struck again and again, each blow carrying the accumulated fury of a man who'd watched his world nearly fall too many times. Darkseid fought back, Omega beams lancing against armor that absorbed and redirected the energy. They were beyond mortal combat now, two titanic wills clashing with Earth itself as their battleground. You cannot win, Batman. Darkseid snarled between impacts that cratered stone. Even with stolen godhood, you remain human. Mortal. Finite. I don't need to win, Batman replied, his voice already showing strain as the armor's power began eating through his system. I just need to hurt you badly enough that conquering Earth costs more than you're willing to pay. 5 minutes should do it. He increased the assault, each strike calculated for maximum damage, targeting weak points in Darkseid's armor that only Batman's tactical genius could identify. The new god bled, actual crimson blood flowing from cuts that Superman's punches hadn't achieved, and with each wound, the tactical calculus shifted. Ahsoka stood beside Superman and Diana, watching Batman accomplish the impossible through sheer determination and technology that was killing him second by second. The armor's systems showed critical warnings: heart rate approaching, failure threshold, bones microfracturing under the strain, neural pathways burning from power they weren't designed to channel. He's dying, Diana said quietly. The armor will kill him if he keeps this up. He knows, Superman replied, and his voice carried the agony of watching a friend sacrifice himself. That's why he designed it this way. Batman doesn't believe in half measures. Darkseid must have reached similar conclusions, because the new gods suddenly disengaged, using boom tube technology to create distance. He stood at the harbor's edge, armor cracked and bleeding, Omega energy crackling around his damaged form. For the first time since arriving, His expression carried something other than absolute confidence. "You have earned a reprieve, Earth," Darkseid said, his voice still carrying the weight of inevitability despite visible injury. "Batman's sacrifice has made conquest too costly for this moment. But I am eternal. I will return, and when I do, your defenders will not stand again." His eyes fixed on Ahsoka. "Especially you, dimensional anomaly. Your energy signature is catalogued. Your capabilities measured. Next time, I will bring forces specifically designed to counter your abilities." The boom tube opened behind him, and Darkseid began backing toward it. Omega beams keeping Superman and Diana at bay. "Remember this day, Justice League. Remember that I withdrew only because the cost exceeded current tactical value. Apocalypse is patient. Apocalypse is eternal. Apocalypse is—" Retreating, Batman interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper as the Hellbat armor powered down and Bruce Wayne collapsed. "Darkseid is retreating. That's all that matters." Superman caught Batman before he hit the ground, cape wrapping around his friend's broken form with protective care. Diana moved to guard their position as the boom tube closed, taking Darkseid and his invasion force back to Apocalypse to lick wounds and plan future vengeance. Silence settled across the harbor, broken only by distant sounds of the League mopping up, remaining parademon, stragglers, and the harsh breathing of heroes who'd pushed themselves beyond breaking points and somehow survived. Ahsoka felt the crystal in her bracer crack, its power exhausted, her force connection returning to its adapted baseline. She collapsed to sitting, shoulders screaming, ribs protesting, exhaustion threatening to drag her into unconsciousness. They'd won. Barely, desperately, at costs that would require weeks to properly assess, but they'd won. "You held him," Superman said, still cradling Batman, but looking at Ahsoka with expression that carried profound respect. 7 minutes against Darkseid himself, injured and outmatched, and you held him. That's incredible." "I had help," Ahsoka said, gesturing weakly at the devastation around them. "Everyone had a role. I just played mine." "The role of bait," Diana added, limping over to check Ahsoka's injuries with experienced hands. "One of the most dangerous positions in any battle. You volunteered for it knowing Darkseid would try to kill you personally." She met Ahsoka's eyes. "That's not the action of an independent ally. That's the action of a Justice League member who trusts her team enough to risk everything." Ahsoka wanted to argue, to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to claim. But the words wouldn't come because Diana was right. She'd trusted Batman's plan, trusted Superman and Diana to arrive when needed, trusted the League to execute tactics that required perfect coordination and absolute faith. She'd functioned as part of a team, not a subordinate, not a weapon to be wielded, but an equal member contributing her unique skills toward shared objectives. Maybe that was what the Jedi Order should have been, not a hierarchy enforcing conformity, but warriors working together because they chose to, because they trusted each other, because the alternative was facing darkness alone. "Okay," Ahsoka said quietly. "If you're offering membership, I'm accepting. Not because I need the League, but because the League deserves every warrior willing to stand against tyrants like Darkseid." Superman's smile could have powered Metropolis. "Welcome to the Justice League, Ahsoka Tano." Officially this time, as medical teams arrived and began treating injuries that ranged from serious to catastrophic. As Earth's defenders regrouped and assessed damage that was severe but survivable. As news networks broadcast footage of heroes standing against impossible odds and emerging victorious. Ahsoka felt something shift in her understanding of what it meant to belong. The Jedi Order had been her family until it failed her. The 501st had been her brothers until the Empire tore everything apart. She'd walked alone for years, convinced that independence was the only path that wouldn't end in betrayal. But the Justice League had proven different. They'd trusted her despite being a dimensional refugee. They'd fought beside her despite her insistence on maintaining autonomy. They'd respected her principles while showing her that unity didn't require surrendering individual judgment. And when Darkseid had come for Earth, with armies and Omega beams and the promise of absolute conquest, they'd stood together, god and warrior, and detective and refugee, and told tyranny that Earth would not fall quietly. The galaxy far, far away still existed, still suffered under Imperial rule, still needed heroes willing to fight. Someday, maybe, Ahsoka would find a way home, would rejoin that struggle with lessons learned from this dimensions, gods and shadows. But for now, Earth was home. The Justice League was her team. And somewhere in Gotham's shadows and Metropolis's light, between the Watchtower's crystalline architecture and the endless struggle against darkness that defined heroism, Ahsoka, Tano had finally found what she'd been searching for since leaving the Jedi Temple behind. A place where warriors stood together because they chose to, where power served justice rather than authority, where hope persisted not through naive optimism but through the stubborn refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming darkness. A place worth fighting for, a place worth defending, a place worth calling home. The Watchtower's Memorial Hall held names of heroes fallen in defense of Earth. A reminder that even gods could die, that courage sometimes demanded ultimate sacrifice. Ahsoka stood before the newly inscribed names from the Apocalypse invasion, reading designations of heroes she'd never met who'd given everything to hold the line. Batman had survived, though he'd be recovering for months. The Hellbat armor was sealed away with notation that its next use would likely be lethal. Worth it, Bruce had said when Diana scolded him. Earth survived. That's all that matters. 3 months had passed since Darkseid's retreat. 3 months of rebuilding, training, and integrating into Earth's heroic community. Ahsoka had worked with the Bat family in Gotham, learning how shadows could shelter hope. She'd trained with the Teen Titans, discovering that young heroes carried their own wisdom. She'd studied with Constantine and Zatanna, refining her Force abilities through DC's mystical framework until the distinction between dimensions became irrelevant. She was still Ahsoka Tano, former Jedi, Clone Wars veteran, survivor of Order 66. But she was also something new, Justice League member, Earth defender, warrior who'd found purpose in a dimension that wasn't hers by birth, but had become hers through choice. Thinking about home, Superman joined her at the memorial, his cape settling with practiced grace. Your galaxy, the people you left behind. Always, Ahsoka admitted. But I've learned something since arriving here. Home isn't just where you come from. It's where you're needed, where you choose to stand, where you find others worth standing beside. Wise words, Superman said. Very Jedi. Very Justice League. Ahsoka corrected with a slight smile. You taught me that. All of you. Showing me what heroism looks like when it's honest about its limitations, when it values individual judgment as much as collective action, when it understands that the best teams are built on trust rather than hierarchy. She thought of Anakin, wondered if he'd be proud or disappointed, if he'd understand why she'd chosen to stay in this dimension, rather than find a way home immediately. She thought of the Jedi Council, their rigid certainty and ultimate failure. She thought of everyone she'd lost, everyone who'd shaped her, everyone who'd taught her that sometimes walking away from a broken system was the first step toward finding something better. Darkseid will return, Superman said, his tone carrying certainty rather than fear. He's patient, but he's also vengeful. Next time, he'll bring everything. Then next time, we'll be ready. Ahsoka replied, hand moving to touch the lightsabers at her belt, weapons forged in another reality, now standing ready to defend this one. And he'll learn what happens when tyrants underestimate warriors who've chosen their battlefield. Across Earth, in Gotham's shadows and Metropolis's light, heroes maintained their vigil. Batman analyzed tactical data and refined contingencies. Wonder Woman trained warriors in Themyscir's eternal combat. The Flash patrolled Central City with optimism that darkness couldn't quite extinguish. Green Lantern guarded space sectors where threats gathered. And in the Watchtower's meditation chamber, Dr. Fate observed the threads of destiny weaving into patterns that suggested great trials and greater triumphs awaited. The Force rippled through this dimension with acceptance now, no longer fighting its new channels, flowing naturally through mystical frameworks that had learned to accommodate a refugee from beyond reality's borders. Ahsoka felt it guide her awareness across Earth's curvature, touching lives saved and battles won, connecting her to this world she'd chosen to protect. The Jedi Order had taught her to serve. The Clone Wars had taught her to fight. The Empire's rise had taught her to survive. But the Justice League, Batman's shadows, Superman's hope, Diana's honor, And all the heroes who stood together, despite their differences, had taught her something the Jedi never could. That true strength came not from dogmatic adherence to ancient codes, but from the daily choice to stand against darkness because someone had to, because innocence deserved protection, because tyranny thrived when heroes remained silent. Somewhere in the galaxy far, far away, the rebellion fought without her. Somewhere in Gotham, criminals learned to fear a new shadow. Somewhere on Apocalypse, Darkseid planned revenge against the Justice League and the Dimensional Refugee, who'd helped deny him Earth. And in the Watchtower's Memorial Hall, Ahsoka, Tano stood among the names of fallen heroes and made a silent promise. She would honor their sacrifice by becoming worthy of standing beside them, by defending Earth with the same courage they'd shown, by proving that sometimes the greatest journeys led not home, but to where you were always meant to be. The Force whispered through dimensional barriers, carrying echoes of battles yet to come and victories yet to earn. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. Hard-won, temporary, but genuine. And hope, that most powerful of forces, shone brightest in the darkness, carried by heroes who refused to let it fade.